All right, we are taking a look at the updated Range of Outcomes app. Before we look at the specifics, I will give a very high-level explanation of what the tool does. What it does is it looks at the player that you search for, their statistical output from the two most recent seasons. It weights them in a way that I have found to be the most useful for this exercise. It then uses that statistical output to do a search for players from seasons prior that in a 2-year stretch put together that similar type of profile. It then says, what did these players do in what would be the third season? And you can use that to get a similar, or to you can use those similar players to approximate what might be a reasonable range of outcomes for a player in a given year. So depending on which position you're searching for, it's going to look at different stats. It's going to take the ones that I have found to be useful in projecting fantasy scoring, and also that will have the tendency to carry from year to year. So that can put everything into this statistical model that is going to do these matches and then give us this range of outcomes. The caveats here are the tool does not know if there were any unique circumstances that went into the stat lines from the two most recent seasons, and it does not know if things have changed for that player in the coming year. It doesn't know if they're on a new team, doesn't know if there's been coaching changes, doesn't know if there's been personnel changes on that team. This is purely a statistical model. In some cases, you might see results for players like Justin Fields, for example. I know if you look at him, you're going to see, or excuse me, it might be Justin Fields or Deshaun Watson. There's a couple of matches for them really on the low end. And you might say, well, you know, for a player like Fields or Watson, I don't think that there's any possibility of that. And that's just because, you know, there might be factors that you would have it adjust for, but a statistical model is not going to know that make that case different than some of the other players' situations that might get pulled in. So that's kind of the high level of what this process is all about. Now, there are 3 tabs in here. We're going to talk very high level about the 3, and then we'll break down what's going on within each. You have a player-specific range of outcomes tab. This is where you can go in and you can study the matches for a particular player and get a better sense of what exactly the average stat line would look like, what have you. But there's also an ROO projections tab where you can compare multiple players. You also have this table down at the bottom that you can use to pull in the values here for average, high, mid, and low across positions, or you can isolate on positions. So if we look at the player-specific ROO tab, just in FFPC scoring for Justin Jefferson, what we have here is this table for 2023 per game range of outcomes. And this is based off of the search that this tool does, where it finds the matching players. And again, it's using a conglomeration of a 2021 and a 2022 stat line blended in the best way that I have found for this exercise to go back and find a group of matching players. Just to refresh users on what a player did in a recent year, we have their 2022 per game stat line. Beneath it, you have the matches from 2022 and 2021. No surprise if you're looking at a player like Justin Jefferson, his matches contain just a ton of good players. You know, you got Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham in there, Hopkins, Jones, AJ Green, Demaryius Thomas. So these are the matching seasons for him. And if you look at matches performance, you can see how those players fared in the year that happened after. So in the case of Michael Thomas, it was his 2018 and 2019 that get him pulled in as a match. And then you look at what he did in 2020. When you put all of these together, that is how you arrive at this per game range of outcomes. This is just looking at the average of these 50 matches that have been created for him. So if you want to look at those visually, the fantasy scoring output, you can go to this distribution graph here under this tab. And what this shows us is in these buckets here of approximately, depending on how it gets graphed on who you're looking at, of like 1.5 to 2 point ranges, the number of matches that fell into that bucket. So you can see in the case of Jefferson in FFPC scoring, his highest number of matches, which were 10, scored somewhere around 17-ish to 18 points. Only had a handful of matches going underneath 10. And you can use this to just visualize that range of outcomes for a player and think about where or which buckets most of their matches lie in. And I will update as you toggle between scoring system. And then the other cool thing that you can do is in this year over year change tab, what we're doing is plotting out the changes for those players between their year N and their year N+1. And you're seeing the percentage of players that decreased. And you're also seeing, I shouldn't say the percentage, you're seeing the number of players here that decreased and the number of players that increased, and if they did increase or decrease, by how much. These graphs are normally pretty sobering because the reality is for just about all players, as they progress throughout their career, it's hard for them to perform as well as they have in years prior once you get beyond your first year or two in the league. So most of the good players, you're going to see fewer matches increasing. So don't get too thrown off by that. But at the same time, it does serve as something that can be a good kind of sobering exercise so that you don't get too jazzed up on a player. But you can see somebody younger like Jahan Dotson, it's going to be a more even split here, which is, you'd probably expect in a baseline case to have it kind of split between increasing and decreasing. So that's the year over year change tab. Again, you have the list of matching players here, and then you can look at how they did in the next year, and you can look through the different stats. And if I didn't say it already, obviously the tool is doing a search based on different criteria. It's using different stats depending on the position that you are looking at. The ROO projections tab is really cool. What this is doing, and if we look at just one player to start off, so let's use our Justin Jefferson example. You select your scoring type, and then it is giving you this distribution of their scoring in a slightly different way here. The way you read this is you have percentages on the left side, and you have point totals on the x-axis. So on the y-axis, you have percentages. And like what this is telling us, if you go across the 7.5%, you can see that around 7.5% of Justin Jefferson's matches in PPR scoring went for 15 points. Under 2% were at around like 7. Only maybe little less than 3 were at 10 PPR. So you can kind of get this idea of where his scoring could realistically fall in the points where it's most likely to fall. Now, what's cool is you can drop 4 players in and compare them. So maybe we want to compare Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. You can see now Justin Jefferson's in the gray. A little bit more favorable with more of his matches coming, or a larger portion of his graph coming to the right than Chase. If you wanted, you can compare up to 4 players. And like what you'll see is if you add A.J. Brown in there, that clearly there's a different type of range of outcome for him in comparison to those other 3 guys. Whereas with the other 3, it's kind of a longer distribution, allowing them to have higher percentages of players going, especially at that 15 and beyond range. Whereas for Brown, really, he kind of peaks out around 14, 15 points and then kind of fades off with a very small percentage going over 20 points. So this is a really useful way to compare players. The other thing that I should have mentioned is on the player-specific ROO tab, you can download for each position this table, and the version of this table, it includes all players. On the ROO projection side, depending on whatever scoring you grab here, in addition to this chart, you're going to have a table that lets you select either just a single position. Like here, I'm just on running back. You could throw in all positions, and you can look at, for the scoring method that you chose, a player's average across the 50 matches. You can look at the high, which is if I find the 75th percentile and then I look at the 2 players above or the 3 players above, 3 players below, and average them. That is what I'm calling the high. I don't just take the 75th percentile number, for example, because the thing that people often overlook about percentiles is you can't look at the 74th percentile match, go to the 75th percentile match, and expect that difference to be the same when you go to the 76th. Percentiles don't work like that. So sometimes you get a better picture if you look at an average of values around those percentiles. So I'm using around the 75th for your high. Mid would be around the 50th percentile, which could work out slightly different than your average. And then low are some of the matches near the 25th percentile. So this is kind of your more condensed view of a player's range of outcomes. And you can download those, and all of the different scoring methods, I believe, are included in that file. You can pop it into Excel and then have a little sheet there that you could do some further analysis on or reference later. And then finally, we have this About tab, which kind of explains the process and a little bit more information, but still pretty succinct to what we talked about here. And you have your league scoring assumptions. So there is an article up on the site that walks you through in more detail what exactly is going on inside the mechanics of the tool. None of that has changed in 2023. Really, all that I've done is just kind of change this interface to hopefully make it a little bit easier for people to navigate around and focus in on specific league settings a little bit more. So hopefully, you have fun using this, getting ready for your drafts, and I wish you the best of luck in the coming season.